I'm seeing here, Pamela, there's something that comes up that says somebody has entered the waiting room. Are you taking care of all that?
Absolutely.
Okay, wonderful.
Hi, I'm Marianne, and I'm going to welcome you to this webinar today. We're so excited. So as people are starting to come in, we will just continue to bring them in on stage. We have some incredible guests here today. And so welcome to the Smart Meter Town Hall. I'm so excited. I see some familiar faces here. Hello, Mary. And Doe, and of course, Pamela. So we have some more people still entering. So welcome. It'll be just a couple minutes. As Doe said, I have to skip out a little bit early, so I apologize, but I'm so excited to be able to be here at least for an hour. And we are going to be recording this. So at another date, this will be later available on our website, which is smartmetertownhall.com. And then we will also have snippets. We'll do small clips of this. And I just want to thank Doe so much for putting all of this together, and Pamela for being our technology expert here. So her and I have probably done, we were thinking the other day, maybe thousands of these type of webinars, or Zooms as they call them. So we're so excited that all of you are here and really appreciate you. All right, I'm going to mute for just a minute, and as we're letting people in, it'll probably take a few minutes to get everybody in and settled, and I will be right back. Doe, did you have anything else that you wanted to say as people are kind of coming in here?
You know something, I'll just go ahead and say, of course, thank you, especially to everybody who's made this call possible, and everybody that's working on this call in front of or behind the scenes is doing it on a volunteer basis. And so thank you so much for all of your time. The issue in front of us today is that there is an impending rollout of smart meters in Longmont, Colorado, United States of America. And I'm a resident here. Susan is also a resident. Tim is a resident in the area. And some of us are quite concerned about this additional layer of electrosmog coming to a building near you soon. This rollout is supposed to start in a test area, probably late May or early June. The rest, after they run their tests, then the rest of the rollout is probably going to begin in October of this year. And so since Marianne and I had met at a coffee shop and began talking about these issues, we decided that Longmont really needed a discussion about what this technology was and what its potential downside is, because the city is convinced that this is going to be its ticket to 100% renewable energy. This is number one on the list of the recommendations of something called the Climate Action Task Force that the city came up with. Now, the goal is laudable. Okay, goal is good. The method of getting to that goal is, to my mind, somewhat questionable. And having discussed this with Tim Sheckley over the last couple of years, in his mind, it's not particularly the best technology to get us to our goals. And so that's what we're going to be talking about with Tim. But we thought we needed to start at the lowest common denominator, which is when some of us have asked people in the town, say you're at a coffee shop or in the grocery store or whatever, and you say, what do you think about the impending smart meter rollout here? And people reply to you, what's a smart meter? Then you know there's not been enough education, okay? Now, 2 years ago, really a year and a half, the city of Longmont conceded to having a study session with 3 experts on it. There was only one real expert on it, to my mind, and that was Tim. Tim was the real expert on this call. And so because they didn't show both sides of the coin, we finally just had enough and decided we're going to do our own study group. or study session. And this is it. This is our study session. Only this time we have 4 people who are so incredibly well-versed and knowledgeable in their fields to speak to us. And because it's being recorded, then it can be shown to many, many, many people, many more people that can be on the call today. So basically, that's what I've got to say. There's plenty more I could say. I myself am electrosensitive, but I'm not going to go into that story, which has to do with bringing Longmont Power Company Next Light into our house in 2016. That's a story for another time, but there's many more people out here who are electrosensitive. Some of them don't even know it, and some of them do. And we have a problem with EMF refugees, and this may come up in the conversation today. We'll see. So how are we doing in terms of people coming on, Pamela and Marianne? Should we go ahead and get started with Cece?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So, one more thing. In regards to the question, what is a smart meter? I just want to go over this very briefly. There are 3 types of utility meters that people in this town may have. That would be gas, electricity, and water. Many people already have smart water meters. A smart meter is in place of an old analog electrical meter. In this case, a smart electrical meter is a wirelessly broadcasting meter. It's 2-way, so it can broadcast to a collection point in the neighborhood that then sends the information back to the utility that lets them know what exactly your house is using in terms of the electricity in that moment. And the wireless broadcasting is a problem for many people, whether they know it or not. And it adds another layer of electrosmog into our neighborhoods. So I may have left something out, but it'll be probably pulled in by one of our other speakers because I'm not really a presenter here today. So Cece Doucette, I'd like to introduce Cece, who is Director of Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And all of the speakers here today have short bios and live links on our website that you just came in through, and you can click on any of those to read more about them. And in Cece's neck of the woods, which is in Massachusetts outside of Boston, she's well known, among other, for setting a precedent by helping her children's school system become hardwired, which eliminated the danger of wireless tech in favor of smarter, hardwired technology. And if anyone has in the audience has questions that you'd like to direct to Cece, then please put them in the chat with her name. And that's the same with all of our other speakers. And we will have Q&A after the speakers, after all our speakers finish, with the exception of Tim Sheckley, who has to leave us early. So if you have questions for him, please put them in while he's speaking. So Cece, it's great to have you here. And thank you so much for showing up for Longmont and for wellness here in Colorado.
It's my privilege to join you today, and I'm really excited that this particular panel is focusing on utility smart meters. This is something that is becoming more urgent in all of our communities, and I will do a screen share and go through some slides, and we'll begin to see a little more clearly what the urgency is. So as Doe indicated, I helped my public schools become the first in the nation to even have this little sign hanging in our classrooms with best practices for mobile devices. Unfortunately, we are not actually completely hardwired, and our schools still are waiting for higher authorities to give them that direction. But we are taking precautionary measures, and other schools around the country are hoping to emulate that as well. So I've also worked on legislation in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. We have a little nonprofit called Wireless Education, where we've distilled these issues down into courses that can be completed in about a half an hour. And so we can massively train the public when we get to that tipping point. And I like to share this link, and I will make my slides available at the end of today when they put up the video. I'll see if we can put my slides in the video description, but I like this link. This was another expert panel we did at the National Institutes of Health for the Health and Buildings Roundtable Conference, and we were all made to speak for 10 minutes or less. So it's a really quick, highly credible set of videos for anybody who's new to this conversation to go out and get additional information. And then I was also honored to speak at the Electromagnetic Fields Medical Conference, and EMFs are simply the pulses of radiation that come out of all of today's wireless technology. That's a definition in its most simplified form. But our healthcare practitioners can now go get trained to treat and to recognize these microwave sickness symptoms. So when my schools read the legal fine print that comes with all of our devices, that's where I think they had an aha moment that they better start paying attention to this issue. So for those of you with us who have an iPhone, I invite you to take that out and go into settings. And you can find this in an Android or a Google phone. Just look for RF exposures. But in an Apple phone, you go into settings, scroll down just a little bit and hit general. On a really old phone, you then hit about, but most people have upgraded. And then you do legal and regulatory. And when you go all the way down to the bottom for legal and regulatory, and then it brings up a little menu, and about 4 down is RF exposure. That RF stands for radio frequency microwave radiation, that the industry politely calls energy in this fine print disclaimer. And what's been in there all along is a warning that says this device was tested at X amount of distance from your body. Stay within that distance or greater, or you may exceed the FCC limits for public radiation exposure. And none of us has known that's in there. They also say to use a hands-free option and create distance, because simply by holding a wireless device while it's transmitting, you are getting exposed to levels, in many cases, much higher than what the FCC allows, our Federal Communications Commission. And unfortunately, the FCC never even did biological safety testing. So that legal fine print disclaimer is a good way to open up the conversation with somebody who's new to this and has only heard the industry messaging that all Wi-Fi all the time is the way to go. I also helped to create a first in the nation program with our local public library. And it was hard for me to get my mind around this invisible supposed toxin called wireless radiation. Then I discovered there are radio frequency detection meters that one can purchase. And so I went after a grant in my town, and we became the first in the US to put a radiation detection meter on loan. So what I thought I would start with today here is to give everybody a demonstration of what this radiation looks like. So this is a Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter from Safe Living Technologies. It's a device that was recommended to healthcare providers to put in their practice to loan out to their patients, so they can take it home and do a quick scan and see where this radiation is coming from, and then learn how to do remediation. So you see it's in green in my home because of what I know. And, for those who are new to the conversation, I circled my tail for months because I didn't want to believe that all of our wireless could be harmful. So if this is tough on your brain today, just know you're not alone, but there are very easy solutions once we get our minds around it. So what I'm going to do to give you an example of what this radiation looks like is I'm going to take my cell phone out of airplane mode. And this allows us to see and hear these microwave signals going back and forth. So from this one single device, I'm going to put it back in airplane mode now. We saw microwave radiation levels spiking up to 672,000 microwatts per square meter. And as we'll see a little later on, we want that to be 10 or under inside of our homes. So this radiation is invisible. And if the pandemic has taught us anything, is we need to be very vigilant about invisible exposures in our world today. So that's what we're up against. That's a little public service announcement that my cable station was kind enough to do. We did a walkthrough of my home. So anybody who wants to see what their exposures might be, you can look at that public service announcement for some ideas. So what does the science tell us? Looking first at long-term effects, we have peer-reviewed scientific studies from our country, from Italy, and from other places that show child and adult cancers, DNA damage. We have other studies that show infertility, and it was actually these sperm studies that got me on my feet, because they have taken male human sperm, exposed it to a laptop with the antennas turned on, and it changed the DNA, it slowed the motility, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable in just 4 hours of exposure. So that was the day I found my voice on this topic, and I began to talk to my schools and my town and really anybody else I could get to listen to me. The science also shows this is a neurotoxin. It breaches the blood-brain barrier with this constant spiked erratic pulse of microwave radiation, and the science is documenting that this is linking it into ADD, ADHD, autism, and earlier onset Alzheimer's. Dr. Martin Pall has just come out with a review paper summing up what this is telling us about the earlier and earlier stages of dementia that we're seeing in our society. And children are especially vulnerable. If we look at this diagram here, these are heads tilted sideways, and the little yellow thing is the ear. When you put up a cell phone to an adult brain, it penetrates in about a third of the way. When you put that same cell phone up to, say, a 10-year-old child, it's going about 3/4 of the way into the brain. And on a 5-year-old child, it's going almost all the way into their brain, because children's skulls are thinner and they have a higher water content in their brain that's biologically absorbing more radiation. And it's certainly not good for children or fetuses, and it's not good for you or I either. But every one of these links will take you to the peer-reviewed scientific literature. So don't take our word for any of this today. Please start your own investigation. Now, short-term symptoms are already recognized by the Americans with Disabilities Act, and this is a new term for many of us called electromagnetic sensitivity or hypersensitivity. But a lot of symptoms that people experience today begin to go away or greatly reduce once we know to reduce our exposures. So insomnia is a big one. Time and again, people come back and say, "Cease, I didn't want to know about this. I didn't want to hear about it," but it was starting to ring true. So I took a chance and I shut everything off in my home, and I slept through the night for the first time in ages. Headaches, migraines, nosebleeds, ear bleeds, this chronic fatigue that so many people feel dragged out all the time, while our poor little cells are battling to keep up with this constant pulse of harm that's coming from this radiation. Pain from unidentified sources, skin heating, flushing, rashes, heartbeats that are too fast or too slow, depending on your unique biology. Cognitive impairment is a big one with the brain fog. People can't remember where it was they were planning to go or what they were looking to do. And then anger and behavior issues. When we were at the medical conference, the medical and scientific experts were implying that we can expect to see more of these societal horrible events that we're seeing as this radiation deteriorates the brain. And again, anxiety, depression. We were already at epidemic proportions even before the pandemic. So there's a lot of good we can do for ourselves by simply reducing the exposures. So it's not rocket science. It's not hard to fix. In your own home, for your own personal devices, the things that you have control over, just try to hardwire everything you can. And that just means go to the back of your router, look at these little Ethernet jacks in there, get an Ethernet cable. If you have many devices, you can get these little switches that are kind of like an extension cord for electronics. Then just get a short cable for each one of your devices. You may need to get a little adapter. Who knew? You can hardwire a cell phone. You can hardwire a tablet or a laptop with a little adapter if you don't still have an Ethernet port right on your device. And then just go into your devices and turn off these antennas that are in there. Use a landline if you can. You can forward your cell phones there. So again, just have assurances that it's not doom and gloom. We got ourselves into a pickle, but we know how to get out. So where are the sources of this wireless radiation? We have our own personal devices, and here's a little example of all the things in our home that transmit this radiation. We have the big macro cell antennas, and now we have all these little small cell antennas that are being put in at the curb outside of our homes in many of our communities. We have Elon Musk and his buddies launching thousands of satellites up in the sky that are beaming this radiation down to the earth. And what we're here to talk about today are the utility smart meters. So as Doe said, utility smart meters are now being used to capture our usage data for our gas, water, electric, and solar. But the room for improvement is these constantly pulse radiation. And the message is not no technology. Why do we have to have any radiation, first of all? And why does it have to pulse all the time if you just need to get a reading once a month? So one of the other risks is that this radio frequency radiation can hop on the house wires and pipes, because anywhere there's metal, the radiation is drawn to it. Fires, explosion, improper grounding can become problems. And for those who care about privacy, there is a revenue stream to be had for harvesting one's data and selling that off to vendors who then want to sell product based on what your usage patterns are for your utilities. When we were at the medical conference, several of the lecturers, the doctors and the scientists, said that we see sudden onset microwave sickness when these smart meters go in and when these small cell antennas go in at the curb or big cell towers show up too close to your house. Jeremy Johnson is a Silicon Valley engineer and his wife is a medical doctor. They both got really sick when a bank of smart meters showed up on their home. So he gives a great TEDx talk if you want to go listen to somebody who's lived this and understand what they had to do to become safe again. So what would radiation measurements look like to have safer technology? Outdoors, there are scientists over in, I believe it was Austria, who got together for a conference and determined that if we could stay at 1,000 or less outdoors, we might do okay. But that's presuming that you can have a nice, clean environment indoors where your body can properly cell repair and regenerate. So indoors, we want to be at 10 or less of these microwatts per square meter. And then where you sleep, the science indicates we should take it down a notch there and be at 0.1 microwatts or less. So I've been going around and doing some measurements because I can't seem to get my mind around invisible things. So as Doe indicated, when we first started putting devices on our home to capture our usage for billing, we had analog meters. Those didn't transmit any radiation, and there would be a streetwalker who would come into the neighborhood and take your reading once a month, and then they would send you your bill. From there, we progressed to putting digital meters on our homes that pulse this radiation, and once a month, somebody in a utility truck is going to drive by and point their scanner at your meter, and then they're going to get a reading and do your billing. So I have that on my home right now. So I thought, how many times a day does this thing actually pulse and how much radiation is coming out? So I measured inside my home on the other side of my dining room wall, where we have 2 meters mounted, one for our solar system and one for our electric. And it was giving me 500 microwatts per square meter, which is what, 5,000 times, or at least 50 times higher than where we want to be. But it was doing this spike 17,000 times per day. So yesterday I went out to Northborough, Massachusetts, where somebody tipped me off that they were being asked to upgrade their meters to newer meters. And we thought, what's that? So we went and looked in her basement, and they have something called a 3G or 3rd generation technology meter that's using these microwaves. And we measured, there were 700 of these microwatts. And again, we want to be under 10. And when we did the math on how many spikes were coming out, it was 20,000 times a day. that this radiation is hitting into your home. So then we got in touch with their Department of Public Works, and they let us know where these new 5G transmitters have been installed. And one might ask, well, what was the matter with the 3G ones? It turns out that the wireless industry wants to recoup all those signals that they've been using for third generation technology, and they want to repurpose it. And they want to bundle it together with a whole bunch of other frequencies and call it 5G or fifth generation technology. So we thought, okay, well, where are these 5G water meter transmitters and what do they do? So we went into a business office where one was installed in Northborough, and we measured, and it was measuring inside their building at 50,300 microwatts per square meter, which we can see was 10 times more what that older one was doing. And 200,000 times a day it was beating. And my guess is it was actually doing much more than that. But for the meter that I had, and I was counting as quick as I could, but it was flashing. So I suspect it's going even more than that. So it's important to gather our data, because oftentimes the industry will tell us that it's only going to transmit once or twice a day. And as we see with real evidence, that's simply not true. But this is what one of those new transmitters look like. So there's a lot of good news. I know for those just joining the conversation, this can be like drinking water out of a fire hose. It's a lot to take on. But there's a lot of really good stuff happening in the background. And Martin Luther King Jr. taught us that when we make important changes in society, it comes through 3 channels. One, the public engages. And I want to give a great example out of Maryland, which has the country's largest water district. When citizens got together and calmly and professionally brought the information forward to their community municipal leaders, they actually decided to put an indefinite hold on their rollout of these water meters that would be transmitting radio frequency microwave radiation. So it can be done. So take that as a really good sign to bring back to your own towns, that we don't have to do this just because the industry says that's what we have to do. That's not in our best interest. The second thing is that the courts rule, and Susan Foster's with us today, and she'll be telling us more about that. And then ultimately, public policy catches up and gets enacted. And I want to share something with you on that. New Hampshire is the first government in the United States to become aware of this issue and say, this does look like something we should look at. They passed a law in just 7 months to investigate the health and environmental impact of today's wireless technology. And Representative Patrick Abrami is a true public servant. He puts the public's interest above all else. Why has the insurance industry put exclusions on this radiation? Why does that legal fine print try to warn us? Why is our own government ignoring thousands of peer-reviewed studies showing harm? And why do they only talk about you have to have heat to have harm, which simply isn't true? You don't have to have heat from a device to heat up your head or your body. We have thousands of studies showing harm at this non-thermal, non-ionizing biological level, literally hundreds of thousands of times less than where our government is still allowing us to be radiated. So why do other countries do so much better than we do? And why is nobody looking at the cumulative effect? So we've got phones, we've got baby monitors, we've got gaming devices, Roku, Chromecast, Ring, we've got smart meters, we've got cell towers, we've got small cells, we've got satellites, and nobody's looking that every toxin, the more you put on yourself, the greater the dose and the sicker you're going to get, probably sooner rather than later. So New Hampshire passed a law. They spent a year investigating and issued this groundbreaking report in 2020. And now they have new bills that they're introducing to start actually executing on some of the recommendations in their report. So this is probably our country's best document, and everybody should be looking at least at the first 17 pages, which is the executive summary and recommendations. And then there's kind of a gift from industry in there. The next 10 pages are the industry playbook. That's what they call the minority report. And it shows you what the industry's out there peddling to our town. So know that this is what your town's going to hear, and then we can give you the facts to tell you the truth. So you can look at Dr. Kent Chamberlain, who served on that commission, and he also provides his slides to show why they made the decisions they made. So I won't go through all of this, but know there are resources at every turn. We've got medical training. We've got a website that doctors can go look at with Physicians for Safe Technology. We have very credible information for our engineers and our physicists and our technologists who have only heard all Wi-Fi all the time is great. So it's a hard pill to swallow. But as soon as they learn about it, then they can start being part of the solution.
Cece, this
Yes.
is so. We need to move on to Tim
Okay.
Sheckley, who has to get off. This is wonderful information. Can we count on having you back on for a fuller
Absolutely.
hour at
Absolutely.
least of what you have to tell us? It's wonderful information. Let's see. Pamela should be doing something behind the scenes here. While that is going on, thank you so much. Cece, is there some place that you would direct people to go and find out more about the work you're doing? And also, can they donate to the work? Because I believe yours is a 501c3, is that correct?
Yes, thank you so very much. Yeah, a lot of us walked away from our paying jobs to do this kind of work. So any support that people can offer through time, talent, or treasure, we are more than happy to accept your generosity. You can go to Massachusetts for Safe Technology. It's MA, the number 4, safetech.org. And when I make my slides available, that's all on my final slide in that presentation.
So wonderful. You are a breath of fresh air.
That link was added in with Cece's information at the beginning of her speech.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I'm just going to read a short quote before we bring Tim in. And here's the quote. It is striking that the American Academy of Environmental Medicine called for a moratorium on smart meters in 2012 and continues to veto them today. Based on their literature reviews and clinical experience, they advise no smart meters should be located in or next to homes of those with cardiac or neurological conditions, including Parkinson's or dementia, or electrosensitivity or cancer, end quote. About sums it up. So next, we are going to pull in our friend, Tim Sheckley. And is Tim here?
Right here.
There he is. Okay. Let me just give a little overview of Tim's bio. It's Dr. Timothy Sheckley, PhD, and he's a communications technology expert who currently resides in Boulder, Colorado, and I've had the pleasure of knowing him these last few years. Tim is an international consultant in computer engineering and standardization, former faculty member of the University of Colorado College of Engineering and Applied Science, and senior research fellow at the National Institute for Science, Law, and Public Policy. His background in this subject matter is vast, and I suggest people look up his reports. They favor wired networks. One of them is called Getting Smarter About the Smart Grid specifically. And there are links on our site that you came in through the call to these reports. They're free to download. And when I think about Tim, I just think of the term expert, or he's the go-to guy's go-to guy. So Tim, how are you today?
I'm fine. I hope I can live up to all that.
Oh gosh, well, you are one of the busiest non-retirees that I know, one of the busiest professionals I know. And just so everybody knows, before 2020, Tim was constantly flying or being flown somewhere for expert testimony on smart meters before a court or to a work meeting for international standards committees. And so he's a busy guy, and he's taken a little bit of time to talk to us about Longmont today because he's been involved in this conversation now for a couple of years. So you were kind of there at the beginning of all of this technology, Tim, right?
That's right. Hey, Doe, before we go too far, let me just make one comment. You know, Cece is a hard act to follow because I wish I could be as articulate and clear as she has been. I want to endorse everything she said.
Wonderful. That's great to hear, Tim, because people listen to you, or at least I do. So because you are, in my opinion, and in others' opinions as well, the expert's expert, I would like to hear what is your expert opinion? What should concern us most about Longmont's wireless smart meter rollout?
Well, that's a good question. You've heard a lot about the public health issues around it and the risk involved with all of that. And so I won't talk about that so much. What I have other issues as well. There are a lot of issues about smart meters. There's the whole dimension of personal privacy and the fact that that's a very significant risk around all of that. I've written papers on that too, but my current issue is primarily the fact that it diverts the resources of the cities to what is basically an extraneous technology, investing money and time when we have very little time to deal with the issues around climate change. We need to change our electricity grid radically to a more distributed solar and storage based system rather than a centralized generation and transmission. We need to do that as fast as possible. And the smart meter is a diversion and a false promise because it doesn't help that purpose at all. That's my main concern. It's a waste of time and money when we have very little time to spend.
Okay, and so would you say then that the smart meter in essence is a dinosaur?
Well, yeah, at very least, it's been oversold on the idea that it can help manage electricity. The smart meter was really embraced basically in the time period around 2008 when there were a desperate need to spend money on upgrading the grid, and there was very little that was available to do that. So they grabbed these old smart meters that we designed back in 1990s and pulled them off and put radios on them and said that that's the smart grid. Well, it wasn't. And the main purpose behind that impetus was to spend money and to fire meter readers, get rid of the meter, decrease the costs of operating their utilities so they could automate these people's jobs out of existence. So that was the main purpose. It wasn't about managing electricity. It does not help manage electricity. It has no benefit. I've even been told by people formerly associated with the electric company in Longmont and in Fort Collins that the meters really didn't provide any benefit to consumers whatsoever. It was really about the economics of the utility itself.
Well, that's interesting. I know that Ole, in our sort of online conversation before this call, said some similar things about Sweden, that it never saved, that the advance of technology in Sweden has never saved anybody or any consumer, quote unquote, money. That the cost of everything keeps getting higher and higher. But with that said, would you say that smart meters are actually gas guzzlers in essence, and are they not really green as the city believes them to be?
No, they're not, and it's gotten even worse lately. You talk about Longmont buying smart meters. The city of all of the XL territory, they're going to invest hundreds of millions of dollars to put in a new generation of smart meters to do what they call time of use pricing. That is a false promise. It doesn't, it actually is not just a false promise, but it's harmful because it directs this, tries to direct the use of electricity to the wrong time of day to support obsolete coal generation. And even though it's sold on the opposite excuse, which is the idea of incorporating renewable energy. And that's the story in Longmont. They've been told or that by the industry that are misled by the industry into believing that these smart meters and time of use pricing will help integrate renewable energy into their power grid. It's not true.
Oh, boy. Okay, so I would like it. Could you possibly give the audience an idea of what a mesh network is, Tim? Because that's a part of this infrastructure that they're going to be putting in with these smart meters. But what about fiber to the premises? Couldn't we be doing this in a different way?
Well, that's right. And Longmont is actually a leader, a world leader, or certainly a leader in the United States for the deployment of optical fiber networks. So the electric company there did something very good. They installed a state-of-the-art fiber optic internet access system that's available to everybody in Longmont. I think they have a very high penetration rate where the people have the best service available in the country today overall. And it's an award-winning system called NextLight. Fort Collins is actually putting in the same, another neighboring city here, putting in the same type of equipment right now. So this has a great potential, and it will work with what I consider the alternative to smart meters is really a smarter meter, or let's say what's identified in the Longmont Climate Action Task Force report as a home energy management system that will actually do what the smart meter promises to do, but doesn't.
Well, that's something that you've been working on, though, in the Emma, correct?
That's right. In fact, I have the reason I have two more Zoom calls after this one is to talk about that with another utility and with some of my colleagues in the international standards arena that we're currently working on the standards for this new generation, what we call Emma, energy management and metering architecture.
So does everybody get what a gift it is, not only for all of our speakers, but to the audience here, that Tim has taken a little piece of his time today to come and talk to us. I hope everybody appreciates that, because I surely do.
Well, I didn't answer your question about mesh networks. It's just
Okay.
it's just like think of it as a instead of having a central radio transmitter talking directly to each meter, they do it a different technique. It's like a bucket brigade where each meter passes the message to the next one, to the next one, to the next one, so it ends up resulting in far more radiation because these things are chattering 24/7, whether they're reading data or not. They're passing messages around this mesh network.
Okay, so then that's the extra layer of electrosmog that is being compounding what is already there.
Yeah, you couldn't think of a better way to spread radiation.
Okay. Let's see. I'm just mindful of your time, Tim.
Oh, we're okay for now.
Are we? Okay. Well,
A few more minutes.
What about, I'd like you to address dirty electricity, if you would.
Yeah, that's typically something that comes up when I even talk about optical fiber. They say, well, what about all the dirty electricity? Well, the source of the dirty electricity is the power supplies, the cheap junk that they put in these systems sell. When you buy a router, you buy just about anything these days. So we have this wall plug power supply, and they cut all the components out of it so they can make as much money as possible off of it. And so they take out all the filtering. So those things are just they're notorious for radiating what's called harmonic emissions, or colloquially we call it dirty electricity, but it's extraneous radio signals that are going onto the power line by these cheap power supplies. And so you have to take care, and that's the number one suspect if you have a problem in your house. I'd say it's going to be the power supplies, and that applies to computers and everything else.
Okay, wonderful. Tim, Tim, a question just came in from Nancy, our Nancy that we know. And she was asking, when do you think that the Emma systems are actually going to be available? And could Longmont potentially be a model city for the Emma? If we were able to ask the city to rethink its moving forward with our rollout.
Well, they certainly should. It's certainly a possibility, and they should try that. And it's a good. I'd say it's a good possibility because neighboring city, Fort Collins, is very interested in this as well. They're trying to roll out solar and storage systems. That means putting batteries with all the solar systems. In the future, we will see all solar systems will have to have batteries. I think there are some kind of supercapacitors. And by the way, we're going to have a webinar here next week in Boulder. The Empower Our Future group in Boulder is sponsoring us a webinar on supercapacitors, which are actually, think of it as the next generation battery. That's for your home or for your buildings. And that's a free webinar.
Oh, wonderful.
They do a series of these. But we certainly would like to try this out. We're actually talking this next week with, we have a lot of discussions going with small rural electric associations in this part in the West here that are interested in this because they're the real innovators these days in optical fiber and in microgrids and distributed solar, because they are owned and operated by the people that live there rather than some investors in New York. So, or some hedge fund. They are, that's the way the electricity grid has to go. I think in the long run, we are not going to be able to achieve our climate goals unless we get rid of the investor-owned utility industry.
Okay. So I know that there's been some other questions showing up, and I think probably in the interest of time, and I don't know how to get to that last question that came in. There is also a project over in Basalt, Colorado, and the Holy Cross project, and NREL from Golden is involved in that, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I should have mentioned that is a trial of the same concept as that I'm working on, except what I'm working on is a way to mass commercialize that, to standardize it to the point where it can be mass marketed. But the Holy Cross Energy, which is a rural electric association in Colorado, is a pioneer in this field, and so is NREL, the national laboratories in Golden. They've done a lot of great research on this topic, and the alternatives are there. It's just that the industry keeps diverting attention because they can make more money off of the smart meters.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is that what you're doing, the Emma, it's a work in progress, and it could be ready sooner than we think. It'd be great if Longmont could consider that as to be a model city. There's work going on in Basalt. The Emma is not the only game in town, and there's lots of other people working on these issues and pedaling as fast as they can.
Yeah, the basic idea that we're talking about is that you control energy at the place where you use it. You don't control it at the power plant. The best place to control energy is in your home or building where it's being used. And that's where you should also be generating as much power as you can and storing it. You need the wires and poles in your community just so you can trade them locally with your neighbors. Ultimately, the best place to generate electricity is right as close as possible to where you're using it.
Well, that's a very different picture or vision of the future of Longmont than the one that's currently in place. And I think I kind of prefer your vision, Tim.
Yeah, I think unfortunately Longmont invested a lot of money, like a lot of people did. Even Holy Cross invested a lot of money in coal, 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and in coal generation, because that seemed like the smart thing to do then, but they now regret that. I think all of them that invested in that and regret it, but they have still stuck with it. And Longmont is part of a consortium of 4 cities in northern Colorado that invested in a coal mine and coal plant over in western part of the state and now it's kind of backfired on them, and they're trying to back out of that and to reinvest in solar. And it's not an easy thing to do, especially when they have to build these big facilities. There's still a mentality in the utility industry to make to large centralized facilities and transmission lines, when what we're going to need with climate change and all of the severe weather problems and fires we're going to need to not have transmission lines. We're going to have local community, individual and community resilience through microgrids and local generation. That's the way of the future.
Okay, and so the wave of the future is not a hacker in China finding a way to control door locks, furnaces, or the national grid system through things like smart meters, 5G, the Internet of Things, and so forth. And so this is quoting you: the very concept of a wireless Internet of Things must be considered for what it is, in part or in large part, an unnecessary technology looking for a market and wireless industry cash cow.
You're right. Did I say that? I think that's great.
You did say that. It's in one of your books that we want people to go and download them and read them because they're free. And so with that having been said, would you consider, what do you think about this? Are smart meters a gateway drug to 5G and the Internet of Things?
Oh, well, yeah, in a way, it's part of the same thing. And it sounds like one of the meters that Cece was talking about, the water meters are basically 5G. The industry is trying to salvage that because it has been a failure. There's a whole section in the Wall Street Journal yesterday saying, well, why is 5G not taking off? How are we going to make our money back, on that? So they're now trying to figure out how to put more stuff on it to try to recoup that investment. It hasn't been successful.
Okay, so looking at all of these things, really, none of it is right for me, none of it is right for Longmont, and really none of it is right for people on this call and the citizens of the world, basically.
Yeah, I'd say it's a mistake, and we have to guide our civic leadership in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. Now, one last question, and then I'm going to let you go get to your other call. So if you were going to put on your professor hat for a minute, because I know that's part of your background, what would you give this audience as homework on this subject matter having to do with wired versus wireless, etc.? What would our assignment be?
Well, that's a tough question. There's so many things. But I'd say take Cece's advice and look at everything you do. What do you really need? What needs to be wireless? And there are so many new options that you can, like, there are new forms of Ethernet that are just going to use something as simple as a lamp cord. You don't even need this expensive cabling anymore. When that gets rolled out, that's in the process right now.
Wow.
The new generation of Ethernet, and can go. You can use the old telephone wires in your house for Ethernet if you want, with that new technology, new form of Ethernet. It's called single pair Ethernet. New standards that we developed in the committee I work in over the last several years.
So Tim,
but that's one alternative. There's a lot of things like that.
Oh, that's really great news, because we have Ethernet here, and it is kind of annoying to having the wires running around your living room floor. Let's see. I forgot what I was going to say. I want to thank you so very much for coming on this call in your busy day, and for taking the time to talk to me about it and to talk to Nancy Vandover and others about this very important issue. So thank you so very much.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me, and I think we should get a lot of good advice available on this panel.
Is there someplace people can go to find your work other than the link that I mentioned, which goes to your Getting Smarter About the Smart Grid?
It's Getting Smarter About the smartgrid.org, and the book by that title that's on that site is actually specifically written about smart meters.
And they can also get Reinventing Wires there as well.
That's the newest one that we published 2 years ago. That's about optical fiber and the whole telecom industry right now. And and I'm working on a new one on sustainability of telecommunications and also reinventing electricity.
You go, Tim. He's the
Okay,
man.
well, thank you very much for the invitation. for
Marty
including me
Pfeffer
in the
says
panel.
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye. Oh, boy. He is, Tim, when I asked him to come on this call, he said, well, he hesitated and he said, only if I don't have to prepare for it. And I said to him, Tim, you don't have to prepare anything. All you have to do is open your mouth and talk. And he said, well, make me some bullet points. And it's like, I got to making bullet points. And of course, they ended up being very complex sentences, but we didn't really entirely go to the complex sentences today or all of the quotes I wanted to quote. But he's the guy, he has all of this amazing information right at his fingertips. And so we are very, very blessed to have Tim on the call today. So we're going to move to our next speaker. Hi, Marianne.
So I just wanted to let you know your camera is not working. So I don't know if you know that we can't see you. So I wanted to make sure it's kind of
Now you can, I bet.
Now, perfect. All
Okay.
right. And you can see the chat. We did have a few questions, but hopefully we can get those at another time. Maybe we'll get to have Tim back. That will be awesome.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
All right.
Yeah. I don't know
All
why
right.
that happened. It stopped itself, the video on mine. That's strange.
Okay. All right. Well, we got another great guest, and I hope everybody's enjoying this. It's awesome. I saw Cece holding up the book. Was that Timothy's book that you had there? Awesome.
Yay.
So that's wonderful. And I know we've got some more guests here. I am going to have to scoot out momentarily, but I'm leaving you in excellent hands with Pamela and Doe and obviously the guests as well. So have an incredible rest of your day here. And I do see that Lynn has her hand up. So I'm not sure if we can get that handled before we move on to our next guest.
Or would you like to?
Yeah, I just unmuted her.
Oh,
Lynn,
yeah. No, it's funny because I got this message from a friend that it's in Circle Talk, which starts at 1 o'clock today, actually. Or I mean at 2 o'clock. And I got this notification. And so, of course, I was going to send it to Tim, my friend, who I've worked with forever in municipalizing the local electric supply. And then I saw, oh, he's speaking on it. So you've done very well finding Tim, however you did. And then it all came back to me anyway. I was going to send in and invite him to his own talk.
well, look at you. That's awesome.
Pretty cool.
All
Anyway.
right. Thank you, Lynn.
Okay.
All right. You've got the floor, Doe.
All righty. Okay, our next presenter is Susan Foster. And this is amazing that I even found Susan Foster. I knew of her work. A number of years ago, I knew that the International Association of Firefighters had issued some sort of a guideline or resolution saying they didn't want cell towers on top of their facilities because obviously they were harming the firefighters. Susan is very much responsible, maybe with the addition of one or two or a handful, however many other people who pushed for this. So she recently, in the last couple of years, strangely moved first to Lyons and then to Longmont. Now, she is a writer, medical social worker, and honorary firefighter with the San Diego Fire Department. She worked with California firefighters and others to chronicle the harm caused to our first responders from cell towers on or adjacent to fire stations. In 2004, she co-authored a resolution which was passed overwhelmingly by the International Association of Firefighters, urging a moratorium in the U.S. US and Canada on the placement of cell towers on fire stations. Her writing is to be found on the Environmental Health Trust website and other sites dealing with the dangers of wireless radiation. And we in Longmont are more than fortunate that we count her as one of our residents. Susan, besides her knowledge on smart meter fires and the issues around firefighters, she has worked closely with one of the main litigators on the recent landmark lawsuit against the FCC, Scott McCullough, which was won by the Environmental Health Trust and Robert Kennedy Jr.'s Children's Health Defense. She is uniquely qualified to comment on what this case means to you and me and what it may mean for Longmont and more widely and other cities in the US. Was the FCC derelict in its duties to the public on failing to update its 1996 radio frequency guidelines? Well, I certainly think so. And to top it off, she will also share her well-qualified perspective on the omnipresent danger of smart meter fires. And she is also here today in spite of having a bug, but her voice sounded really good to me earlier when I talked to her on the phone, but she is such a champion and a hero. So Susan, take it away.
Thank you, Joe. Joe, I'm going to read my comments, and if at any point I can't continue, I run out of voice, then Joe is going to take over for me. So good afternoon. My name is Susan Foster, and I'm a medical writer and a fire and telecommunications utility consultant. I'm here to speak today about a groundbreaking court case in which two major nonprofits, as Joe told you, took on the FCC and sued because the RF regulatory limits have remained the same for over a quarter of a century. And even in light of the 5G build out, the FCC did not tighten the allowable limits of radiation. The second thing I'm going to talk about deals with electrical fires within smart meters and the risks the community of Longmont and any community with smart meters can face. To begin, let's address how environmental health trusts and Children's Health Defense historic win against the FCC came about, and ask what it means in terms of RF guidelines and what it means to you as an advocate in your community. First, a little background. The Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, set regulatory limits for RF emissions in the 1990s, 1996. Since that time, and in spite of 5 generations of advancement in wireless technology, those limits have remained the same. In 1996, the FCC adopted guidelines which only protect consumers from adverse thermal effects. That's temperature change in tissue, while ignoring evidence of harms from RF radiation in non-thermal levels. In 2012, the federal watchdog agency, the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, issued a report suggesting the FCC's RF energy limit exposure may not reflect the latest research. And so it was because of this report that the FCC published an inquiry in 2013 to decide whether the guidelines should be reviewed. So docket 1384 was open for the public to file comments. And once it was open, thousands of scientific studies and opinions were submitted. They continued to be submitted over the next 9 years. In April 2019, while 5G was already mandatorily being rolled out, a letter was written by the FDA's Dr. Jeffrey Shuren, the director of the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, giving the FCC the green light on 5G, indicating that the present regulatory limits that had been in effect since 1996 were sufficient to cover health interference concerns related to 5G. With limited explanation, on December 4th, 2019, so later that same year, the FCC terminated their review of comments submitted to the FCC, indicating that the RF radiation limits were going to remain the same as they had for the last nearly quarter of a century, in spite of the 5G buildup, and in spite of growing concerns over the safety of cell phones, smart meters, Wi-Fi, and 5G towers in the public rights of way all across America. This was the last straw for two major nonprofits. In early 2020, the Environmental Health Trust and Children's Health Defense sued the FCC. Those two cases were combined into one, and the name of the case is Environmental Health Trust et al. Versus Federal Communications Commission in the United States of America. The case challenged the agency's decision not to review its 25-year-old RF guidelines, which regulate the radiation emitted by wireless devices such as cell phones and iPads, and infrastructure such as cell towers, Wi-Fi, and smart meters. The organizations filed joint briefs in the case, and the petitioners filed 11,000 pages of evidence of harm from 5G, 11,000 pages. Evidence of harm from 5G and wireless technology, which the FCC ignored, including evidence already existing of widespread sickness. The case was argued before DC Circuit Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. on January 25th, 2021 by CHD lead counsel W. Scott McCullough. The U.S. Court of Appeals of the DC Circuit published its decision on August 13, 2021. The court ruled that the FCC failed to consider the non-cancer evidence regarding adverse health effects of wireless technology when it decided that its 1996 RF emissions guidelines protect the public's health. The court judgment stated that the case be remanded to the commission, meaning the FCC, to provide a reasoned explanation for its determination that its guidelines adequately protect against harmful effects of exposure to radio frequency radiation. The court's decision truly exposes the FCC and the FDA as captive agencies that have abandoned their duty to protect public health in favor of increased telecommunications industry profits through what can only be called a revolving door of telecom industry personnel at the FCC and the FDA. When you look at their head of radiological devices, Dr. Jeffrey Shuren, with his thinly disguised and severe conflict of interest. This is a truly historic win. The FCC will have to reopen the proceeding and for the first time meaningfully and responsibly confront the vast amount of scientific and medical evidence showing that current guidelines do not adequately protect health and the environment. So, what does this mean to consumers who live under the regulatory guidelines put in place by the FCC in 1996 and never updated, in spite of decades of independent science submitted to the FCC? For now, the regulatory limits remain the same, for now. First, the FCC must review the science before it and justify their guidelines according to the science. We do not know how long that process is going to take. I would like to explain something that's very important about this case. The courts typically do not like to interfere with federal agency or commission commission actions. Yet it was inaction on the part of the FCC that EHT and CHT argued against. The court only needed to determine that the agency had considered the science. That's how high the bar was. All the FCC had to do was consider the science. And then the court would have decided in favor of the FCC. Yet they voted 2-1 that the only area in which the FCC had examined any science and rendered a conclusion, albeit a very different one than the plaintiffs, was the science relating to cancer. The court did not find there was no proof of cancer. The court acknowledged that was not their job to do so. The court simply said the FCC had rendered an opinion on their view of the science. Yet the court did not find the FCC had taken into account science regarding the following, and it's a long list: wildlife, the environment, cumulative effect of multiple devices, which Cece referenced, children, modulation and pulsation, electrosensitivity, the brain, neurology, oxidative stress, DNA damage, and male infertility. Now, I have heard people say that the courts decided that RF radiation does not cause cancer. This is not at all what the court said, but I can see why it's confusing. The bar for the court in determining whether or not a federal agency or commission has done their job or not is whether they have engaged in something called reasoned decision-making. Did they look at the science? Did they analyze it? Did they draw a conclusion? In the case of cancer, the FCC submitted documentation that they had reviewed the National Toxicology Program, or NTP study, and they believed it did not cause cancer. Now, the plaintiffs had very different opinions than the FCC, which is probably not going to shock anyone in the listening audience. Just for the record, let's just take a quick peek at the NTP study. The $30 million NTP study took more than 10 years to complete, and it's one of the most comprehensive assessments to date of health effects in animals exposed to RF radiation. The NTP study found that exposure to high levels of RF radiation, like that used in 2G and 3G, which was how the study was set up 20 years ago now, was associated with clear evidence of malignant tumors in the hearts of rats, some evidence of malignant gliomas or tumors in the brains of male rats, some evidence of tumors in the adrenal glands of male rats. According to Dr. Ron Melnick, the NTP study lead scientist, DNA damage was significantly increased. Now, the FDA, which has been known on occasion to show industry bias, released a statement after the NTP study was completed, saying that the study applied only to rats and mice. Of course it did. This was a study of rats and mice. It's true, of course, that the study was a rodent study, and it's important for you to understand that every single carcinogen, every single one, was first tested on rats and mice, every single one. Now, how does the EHT-CHD win against the FCC directly impact the build out of 5G or smart meters? For now, the regulatory limits remain the same. The court has ordered the FCC to go back and apply reasoned decision-making, taking the science into consideration for all the categories I mentioned, and then see what sort of regulatory limits should apply. So at this moment, there's no direct impact on the build out of 5G or the rollout of smart meters, but there's an indirect effect that is very much present. Some of the wording from the judicial decision may be helpful when educating local city councils and county boards of supervisors. Let's take 5G first. Even though state and federal law mandates that the public rights of way must be leased out to telecom carriers, there are still a few areas like aesthetics, safety, insurance, and performance bonds and removal bonds that can be implemented through local zoning ordinances. Smart meters are a little different because not every city is making a decision to buy smart meters. And unlike cell towers, it is legal. It is legal to object on health grounds related to RF radiation. Given the court decision and that the FCC was arbitrary and capricious in leaving the regulatory limits the same for more than a quarter of a century, in spite of 5 generations of wireless development, it's reasonable to go to your city leaders and ask, even if the contract has already been signed, as it has been with smart meter manufacturer Landis & Gear in Longmont, 1, is this the best use of our city's money? And 2, how much would it cost to get out of the contract? We know so much more now than we did when many of these contracts were first signed. It may be helpful to lobby local leaders using some of the language from the DC Circuit Court of Appeals judgment in favor of environmental health trust and children's health defense. For example, on pages 9 and 10, the majority opinion rendered on August 13th, it reads as follows: under this highly deferential standard of review, we find the commission's order arbitrary and capricious in its failure to respond to record evidence that exposure to RF radiation at levels below the commission's current limits may have caused negative health effects. It's extremely important. Radiation at levels below the commission's current health effects may cause, at current limits may cause negative health effects. The court admonished the FCC for setting the majority of the regulatory limits in an arbitrary and capricious manner. So what does that mean? First of all, understand that it's extremely rare for the courts to criticize a federal agency or commission in this way. Black's Law Dictionary defines arbitrary and capricious as a willful and unreasonable action without consideration or in disregard of facts or law. So that's an incredibly high bar for plaintiffs to prove that a federal agency did not engage in reasoned decision-making, but rather, as the court determined, willfully and unreasonably and without consideration for the facts or the law, kept the regulatory RF limits for 5G and everything else exactly as it had been for the last quarter of a century. Arbitrary and capricious. Please don't forget that. This may assist community efforts to improve local small cell 5G ordinances to get more information on proposed, and I should say, or to get more information on proposed smart meter build-outs, opt-outs, or even re-examine already signed contracts. The court case helps in the following way. If your city or county leaders understand that we are not living under an umbrella of safety when it comes to the radiation emitted from cell towers, cell phones, Wi-Fi, and smart meters, they may be more inclined or be more willing to listen to well-reasoned and well-organized efforts by citizens requesting fair hearings on their legitimate safety concerns. And that's what I really want to impress upon you. These are legitimate safety concerns. When it comes to smart meters, it is imperative that you educate your cities of not only the RF risks at below the regulatory limits, but you also must educate your cities about the fire risks associated with smart meters. The last 2 years, I have worked with an attorney and an electrical engineer on the fire risks associated with telecommunications equipment. Cell towers and smart meters have one thing in addition to RF radiation in common. They are electrical devices and they will fail because all electrical devices eventually do. So it's the job of the professional engineer like Dr. Sheckley to make sure that when they fail safely. If electrical devices such as cell towers and smart meters break down due to faulty engineering, faulty installation, or failure to replace corroded parts, these electrical fires cannot be fought through conventional means. First, the power must be cut. If the smart meter on the side of your house is on fire, your first temptation might be to grab the garden hose and extinguish the fire. The result would be electrocution for the person holding the garden hose. That's why fire departments are trained to stand down in the face of smart meter fires or cell tower fires until the utility representative arrives on the scene to let the fire department know the power has been cut. Then and only then can the fire be fought. There are numerous individual cases of smart meters spontaneously catching fire. And to me, the most intriguing one occurred in a small California town where a smart meter attached to the home of the town fire chief spontaneously burst into flames. I interviewed the chief about this incident. He had been standing in his driveway at the time the smart meter burst into flames. He made 2 calls. The first was to his own fire department, which of course he commanded. And the second one was to PG&E because they were the utility for this part of California. The fire chief knew the power had to be cut before the fire could be fought. By the time the power had been cut, the fire had jumped from the side of the chief's home to the neighbor's home, so now 2 house fires had to be fought. Now the PG&E representative arrived on scene to say that the power had been cut, and the chief ordered his men to attack the fire. The PG&E representative was not alone. He and some other men with him stood to the side until the fires in both homes were extinguished. Then they stepped forward and started removing not just the smart meter that had caused the fire in the first place, but all the meters associated with the home. And I would like to mention that this happens uniformly across the country. The chief cautioned the PG&E rep that he was removing evidence and that was against the law. The PG&E rep said nothing as he continued to remove the meters and vacate the property. Another reason utility companies are always on scene is because they have to arrive in person to confirm the power has been cut, but they are always there. And from what I've heard from the firefighters and concerned citizens alike, when considering the smart meter fires, this removal is uniform after the fire is extinguished, and the proof that the fire has been started at the smart meter has been removed. Many of you may not know, I have worked with firefighters for over 2 decades, so I have heard stories from firefighters who have been on the scene and witnessed this, but never had I heard this from a fire chief. Never from the fire chief who actually owned the home and was present when the smart meter caught fire. Smart meter fires are not just one anecdotal story after another, although indeed they exist in abundance. Let me just scratch the surface of smart meter fires on a larger scale. In 2015, nearly 5,000 PG&E smart meters exploded and caused over 80 house fires when a transmission line contacted a distribution line, sending a surge through the city that exceeded the smart meter's capacity. In Canada and the US between 2012 and 2015, 17 utilities, removed 790,000 census smart meters as a safety precaution because of a fire hazard. Now, an engineering design flaw is part of the problem, and the fact that this has never been corrected across the industry continues to astonish me. These fires did not occur with analog meters. One moment, please. Smart meters bypass the fuse box, and they rely on something similar to a varistor, since they don't have that fuse box as a backup system. The varistor is a surge protector, very much like you would find in a television set. So it's okay for relatively low voltage, but when you have a 1 million volt lightning strike near your home, or a surge that goes through entire communities in multipliers of 1,000 volts, those varistors that can hold back 350 volts are useless. If the smart meter were connected to a fuse box, a surge would trip the fuse in the fuse box and no more electricity would go into the house. But if you have a surge that hits a community, as it did in Stockton in 2015, with smart meters on the sides of homes, it can trigger smart meter fires, and the surge can then continue into the house because of the flow of electricity not being stopped at the fuse box. So electricity can continue to course into the home and literally set appliances on fire inside the home. What I would urge all consumers to do is ask your local utility if they are considering installing smart meters to show the engineer's report that confirms The type of smart meter being installed in your community has found a way to eliminate the fire risks inherent in the vast majority of smart meters. I know that the company Longmont has contracted with has a history of fire incidents. Whether that history has been instructional from an engineering point of view for the company, I don't know the answer. But a report from a professional engineer should be required to show that the fire risks have been eliminated, and explain, that report should also explain how those risks have been eliminated. To not have such a report would be remiss. The other report I would urge consumers to ask for is the report proving that the sustainability promised will be delivered, as Dr. Sheckley referenced. The type of smart meters being installed in Longmont, for example, do not have a track record of saving electricity. Therefore, I would ask people to ask their elected officials exactly why this deal was made and where those two crucial reports are that I just mentioned. Ask for a report on fire, proving that your community will not go through the same fire risk that Stockton went through in 2015, and ask for the report on sustainability. It's a $13 million or $16 million, I believe, expenditure worth. Will it be worth it? And will there be an energy savings for Longmont? So you want proof of fire safety, you want proof of sustainability going forward. In so many instances, we have been sold hype, both on sustainability and fire safety. The harsh reality is that both may be false promises. Thank you.
Oh, Susan, thank you so much. That was such a detailed presentation on the lawsuit and also the smart meter fires. For people who are not necessarily used to this sort of lingo that some of us know, RF radio frequency guidelines, that was one little bit. And then what, the next National Toxicology Program, NTP,
That's National Toxicology Program, right? And RF is the abbreviation for radio frequency radiation.
Okay. And that's what Susan was talking about, using those terms. Also, I wanted to say, using terms like 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G, people have a lot of confusion around what exactly that means. When we get to 5G, all it is saying really on any of the Gs is that they are 5th generation wireless technology, infrastructure, and devices. And some people get confused with 5 gigahertz. And so 2G is 2nd generation, 3G is 3rd generation, and so on. That's just to clarify for people. Excuse me. I wanted to just mention what I find very interesting about your presentation here. Everything, but when we had a study session in October of 2020 with the Longmont City Council, there were 2 others besides Tim Sheckley. And in my opinion, Tim was the only real expert that was there. One person who was supposed to report on health effects and radio frequency and so on was from the Boulder County Health Department. It was an air quality engineer, and he admitted that he really wasn't qualified to talk on the subject of EMR and electromagnetic radiation and health effects. But he went ahead and he did the best he could in a short presentation, but he just really kind of put it back to both the FCC guidelines, the FCC radio frequency guidelines, and the National Cancer Society and their positions on these frequencies. And now we know for sure with this lawsuit that remanding anything back to the FCC radio frequency guidelines at this moment in time is just a little bit suspect because of the things that you outlined in your talk. And this is something that we have brought to our city council here. Several of us have mentioned both when the lawsuit was coming
Mhm.
when it was coming, that there was going to be a ruling, and if they ruled in the favor that we would like, that was going to throw the radio frequency guidelines up into kind of a gray zone and a gray area. And so we wanted them to think twice about putting out this technology when we were still in this gray area.
And
Is that
that's a good point, because there is no umbrella of safety. There's not an umbrella of safety with respect to cancer either. But what the court said was that their only job was to see if the FCC was actually doing their job. That's the court's only job. The courts don't like to get involved with federal agencies or federal commissions. So the only thing they can judge is not whether or not they've done their job correctly, but have they done their job at all? And what they were saying was they did their job. They looked at the National Toxicology or NTP study, but they did not look. I read that long list from children, cumulative effect, environment, and modulation and electrosensitivity. These things were not even considered by the FCC, yet we've been hearing from our governing bodies, our city councils, our boards of supervisors, this is all within the regulatory limits, all within the FCC limits, therefore it's safe. No, it's not. It's absolutely not.
Okay, well, I know that when you speak to me or you speak to Tim and Ole and so forth and Cece, you're preaching to the choir. There's some of us that you are preaching to the choir, but there's a great many people that we hope either are watching this today or will watch it in the future that become educated on this subject matter. Because, you know, in the study session held by the city of Longmont in October of 2020, again, the fellow who spoke to health effects, he said that the science was pretty much settled around 2013. And I was astonished that he made such a statement, because I knew that that was absolutely incorrect and that he was just uninformed about it, which is unfortunate. And also the expert on the other side of Tim was someone from the actual AMI or advanced metering infrastructure, which is also smart meter industry, who eventually ended up working with the city on this project, basically completely downplayed the risk of fires. And what you have said here is that there is a very substantial risk of fires, and it's also to a certain degree common knowledge among certain individuals in that I speak to anyway, that this taking of evidence is going on by removing smart meters after the fire. I hadn't realized that it's completely illegal to do so, but you have to wonder what went on in the Marshall fires. We know that you know, here in Colorado, we got hit with those winds that day, but once things were triggered, is the possibility, did it exist that these meters on these homes, there had to have been smart meters there, were they talking to one another, and did they actually create some sort of a domino effect? And that's just pure speculation for me, but I know that it's floating around in a lot of people's minds at the moment about those fires.
Well, until there's evidence for the Marshall fire, I wouldn't get into that. But because you have to have evidence, but that's the point that I'm trying to make, and that this fire chief was trying to make. And the firefighters have been making this point since, I think, when smart meters came to California in 2009. Remember that the utility representative always has to be on scene to say the power has been cut, now you can fight the fire. So they didn't, until I understood that, I didn't know why they were always on scene and they always took away the smart meters. I understand now why they're always on scene, because these are electrical fires, and to fight them conventionally means somebody's going to be electrocuted, whoever's holding that hose. But the fact that they're there serves two purposes. They're there to say to the fire department, the power's been cut, but then they wait and they take away the evidence, which is against the law. And what I don't understand is why there hasn't been some sort of pushback from the insurance industry against this taking of smart meters from the sides of homes after they appear to have triggered entire house fires.
Okay, well, that we'll let that be the last word, but that is just such wonderful information for me and for everybody on this call. Is there somewhere that people can go to follow your work, Susan?
Shannon Shine, an attorney in Colorado, and I are starting a nonprofit shortly. We're in the process of setting it up. It'll be Rocky Mountains for Safe Technology, and we will be working on, certainly fire is part of it, but we will be working primarily on zoning to help guide people through the zoning process to try to create safer 5G ordinances in their communities. There's very little we can do, but we have 4 things we can work with. And so we'd like to, it's a very intimidating process, and we would like to help people through this and empower people to try to change things at the local level.
Well,
So at this point, we don't have our contact information, but we'll relay that when we have.
okay, wonderful. Well, this website that people came onto this call, we're going to keep refining and adding things. It was really thrown up in a hurry because we wanted to get this town hall meeting done. And the main thing was we wanted to give the bio a little bit about all you speakers and have a button where people could go directly into the call, which hopefully worked out well. But this has been very illuminating, and thank you so very much for your time on this issue.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, so
Well,
now,
Oh,
yes.
good, your phone's back. I was just going to say.
yes, we're going to head over to Sweden, one of the places where you can probably see the northern lights. Ole, are you there?
I am definitely here. Yes, thank you.
Oh, okay, wonderful. I'd like to introduce to you Professor Ole Johansson, PhD, who is retired. He is a researcher and experimental dermatology unit, Department of Neuroscience at the Karolinska Institute, Stockholm, Sweden. Ole is an international expert on EMF and EMR and living things. His many achievements include early on the coining of the term screen dermatitis, which later on was acknowledged as the functional impairment named electrohypersensitivity, or EHS. It's another one of those abbreviations that we are now finding more in common use. I'd like to quote him here from one of his conferences. In Sweden, impairments are viewed from the point of the environment. That means that no human being is in itself impaired. There are instead shortcomings in the environment that cause the impairment. It is the environment that should be treated and not the people. So Professor Johansson's achievements include being one of the authors behind the original bioinitiative report, for those of you familiar with it. The rest of his accolades are simply too numerous to mention, and suffice to say, Ole now focuses his attention on research into the vanishing pollinators and bees and the EMF connection. As go our pollinators, so goes humanity and our precarious food chain. So please look him up, and if you're able, donate to his research on this critical issue. We will include a link on our site to where you can help. And if you don't find it, please contact me directly by email for the link, or check again on the site. My email, doekelly, DOEKELLY @juno.com. Pamela will put it into the chat, and we'll help you get connected with that for Ole. And hopefully once we get our site in better shape, we'll have just places that you can go directly to help in this fundraising effort. So Ole, I have a couple of questions for you to get you started here before you get into the pollinator. I'm honored and delighted that you're on the call with us today. But first, can you tell us, do you know the current figure of how many electrosensitive people there are today in the world?
Yes, I do. And there has been calculations, and I will just give you the smallest number, so no one will accuse us of exaggerations. And the smallest number that has been calculated is 350 million people.
Okay, okie dokie. And the second question I had for you is, who is the person that you've said is the world's most famous electrosensitive?
Well, right now that would be Gro Harlem Brundtland, who is a medical doctor, the former Prime Minister of Norway, and the former head of the World Health Organization. A fantastic woman, very composed and collected, very intelligent. And she came forward and told the world that she is electrohypersensitive.
Well, that's really kind of an amazing story to me, in the respect that there are so many people that deny that electrohypersensitive or electrosensitivity even exists, and that there seems to be a disconnect when you get between what is known as the hard sciences versus the soft sciences, meaning more engineering versus biology and medicine and so forth, that somehow we need to connect the two sides of the brain so that we can get the full picture.
Yeah, that's very true indeed.
And so take it away, Ole, please tell us,
Yeah.
what would you like to impart?
You said before that we were preaching for a choir, and I definitely feel like a small altar boy in this amazing choir. Cece, Tim, and Susan gave these fantastic presentations, and I really don't need to add very much more. But since I'm on the air, I want to take the opportunity to say something completely different first. I have been waiting for 45 years to say this, namely to all people living in Colorado and especially in Keystone and Denver. Thank you a million times. You put me on a page 45 years ago that expanded into an enormous interest, namely downhill skiing. When I came to Keystone at the conference, I had never been on skis. I grew up in a very poor family in Stockholm. We didn't have any money for skis or anything like that. And I had never tried it. And I did try it in the children's slope. And then there was a small boy, 7 to 8 years of age. He would be in the order of 50 years of age today. And he said, well, you follow me up to the summit house. And since I didn't know English very well, I thought he said summer house. And we came up to the top, 4 kilometers up, and there was only one way, namely down. And I destroyed all my clothes completely, but I was hooked. After 50 minutes, I reached the bottom of the valley. And after 1 week, it took me less than 5 minutes to do the same stretch. Thank you, little boy, whoever you are today. And thank you, all people in Colorado. And having said that, I will just quickly introduce myself. 1977, and probably most of you were not even born then, I got interested in the issue of adverse health and biological effects of artificial electromagnetic fields. And after some years, I got more and more interested in the what now is called the functional impairment electrohypersensitivity. And I've been working a lot with that actually, and still I am working with it. And I'm trying very hard to spread the Swedish way of looking upon it as a disability, or as it now is called, functional impairment. And as those said, it's nothing wrong with the person with the functional impairment. It is the environment, and you may even call it a toxic environment that puts obstacles in the way of a person with electrohypersensitivity. And as Cece pointed out, and I think even Susan touched upon that, the values we are discussing, like 1,000 microwatts per square meter or 10 microwatts per square meter, would actually be far too high for a person with electrohypersensitivity. And that brings me over to that nowadays I'm getting more and more interested, as also Doe said, to study biology, wildlife, as well as pets, flowers, animals, bacteria. And the things that keep me awake in the night are several actually. And one of them is the fact that American scientists and other scientists as well have shown that ordinary bacteria we have on us and in us right now, if they are subjected to the second generation mobile telephony or modern Wi-Fi routers, not very much happens apart from one thing, namely they become antibiotic resistant. And when the World Health Organization last year was asked if the COVID-19 crisis was the biggest challenge to the World Health Organization, they said, no, it's not. And then the reporter asked, what is then? Well, it's antibiotic resistance in healthcare. And it has been calculated by the G20 countries that by 2050, approximately 10 million people will die prematurely around the world due to antibiotic resistance in healthcare. But if you combine the studies on bacteria with what is seen in healthcare today, it could easily be 7.7 billion people, because with antibiotic resistance in healthcare, you will start dying from a splinter in your thumb, as your ancestors did until the end of the 1900th century. Another area which is very much an occupation of me is the effect of the various forms of electromagnetic fields generated by, for instance, smart meter communication, cellular telephones, wireless indoor telephones, Wi-Fi systems, etc., 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 is the impact, as was mentioned before, on male fertility and female fertility as well, and the quality of sperm cells. And we are trying and trying and trying to get different projects going, but it is difficult, to say the least. Together with Christine Sips, who is on this call right now, we have also put a lot of energy into the pollinator area, and we are trying very hard to get people to open their wallets, to put it plainly, because after all, at the end of the day, you cannot eat money, you see. And without the pollinators, then we will face huge problems regarding food, especially for the coming generations, the generations we today would call children and grandchildren. And you may not know it, but for instance, more than 90% of the American bumblebees are just gone. And 2017, in Germany, it was reported regarding all pollinators, including the classical honeybees, more than 75%, they are gone.
Yes, Ole, and you know, here in Colorado, I know that the city of Longmont, I've seen it written in various places on the city site, and also heard them talk probably at the Sustainability Advisory Board or other places about this problem. But personally, in our own front garden, we see less and less every year of either bumblebees, and certainly honeybees is huge. We live a mile from an organic farm who told us, and within, well, we're about a mile and a half from them, but they're within a mile of a large cell tower, a mile from us. And they said 2 years ago, their bees packed it in colony collapse disorder. And so I think everybody is really concerned on this topic.
Well, I don't think you're right. I'm sorry to say that, because when we approach people around the world, very, very, very few return our call. And for instance, here in Sweden, people would agree with you that is far less with insects in general. But you know, like a car owner would say, well, that's good. I don't have to clean the windshield any longer. But if you say like that, then you have no knowledge at all about our place among the other 6 to 7 million species on this planet. And I say again, the moment will come when people will try to eat money, and that will not satisfy their need for food. So I think the clock is really ticking very fast. And I see international organizations in organic farming, for instance, in natural habitats, etc., etc., they are calling out, but too few are still listening. But we hope to be able to pursue some experiments. And as I said before, you can look upon different gadgets. And as a scientist, I don't investigate only cell phones or only wireless internet or only smart meters. We look on the whole soup of electromagnetic fields, and the impact on living matter. And what we want to do when it comes to the pollinators, especially using honeybees as a model, is both observational studies, that is to look at what is going on in nature at beekeeping farms, etc. And also we would like to do experimental setups where we want to introduce in a controlled manner the exposure, for instance, from a smart meter. That would be very elegant to do that, and to see what will happen before and after this exposure. And last year we started to do a few such experiments, but running very low on the economy side, it's difficult for us to have the kind of high-tech equipment that is needed. And the need very often comes when you want to publish something, because the journals rightfully will say, hey, you need to use the updated technologies to measure whatever you are going to measure. But I wrote yesterday to Christine Sips and told her at least one paper has now been accepted and we have published before. And to make a long story short, we have seen together with colleagues around the world that when you introduce, like a cell phone, to a beehive, what the queen will do is to collect her worker bees and then leave the beehive, and she doesn't return. And last summer, I talked to bee farmers here in Sweden, and while we had dinner, suddenly one of the ladies said, well, it's well known that you cannot put beehives under power lines, because then the production of honey will dramatically go down. And I said, what is that general knowledge? I never heard about that. Oh, yeah. That we know, all of us, and therefore we don't place this under power line. But what about all the exposures from wireless that is everywhere? Regardless where you move around, you are exposed 24/7. And as Susan pointed out, with very high levels, pulse modulated in such a way, so it's really artificial exposures that haven't been around on this planet before. So it is a full-scale experiment. And yesterday I saw this beautiful baby of a butterfly, and I really flinched, when I saw it, because nowadays in Sweden, insects are very rare actually. And when I saw it, I thought, oh, tomorrow we are going to talk about the FCC, for instance, court of laws, and we are going to talk about authorities, the US Senate, the House of Representatives, and so on. But where does this little butterfly have their FCCs? Where are their House of Representatives, their Senate? Are they, And I felt sad, to be honest, And I do hope we can turn this around and go in another direction. I think Tim pointed to some extremely important ideas. And he also pointed out the whole issue about the word privacy. I mean, you don't want anyone to read everything you do. And I remember some years ago, I pointed out that the very famous Jewish woman, Anne Frank, who lived for several years hidden in Amsterdam during the Second World War, she wouldn't have survived an hour with a smart meter, because the moment they would have turned on one of their light bulbs, then the Nazis would have found them immediately, So
Oh,
there
wow.
is very important privacy issues and confidentiality issues here. And that's not only for smart meters, but for the whole area of wireless communication, the Internet of Things, and so on. And finally, on a positive note, since I now and then have to go to Uleåborg in Finland, which is center for advanced measurements of electromagnetic signals and fields. And it's also a hub for the development of the Internet of Things based on the 5th generation and the common 6th and 7th generation. And what they say is that, no, this Internet of Things, it won't fly. There are too few consumers that are interested in hooking up their toaster with the refrigerator, with themselves, with the freezer and so on, you know. And it's just a too small a market. And many of the risk capitalists are already withdrawing their money from this area and trying to leave it. So maybe people in general are becoming satisfied, saying no to more gadgets, more exposure. And thanks to you, though, and other people, they stand up and say, no, we want to have something else. And that in itself may also save the pollinators.
Oh, heavens. Ole, there's people have these questions they keep writing in with, and I just want to, and I have one too, and I'd love to get to them. That is just great information. Somebody was asking about your take on these events where birds are falling from the skies. Is in your scientific opinion, does that have to do with electromagnetic frequencies or radiation in our the airs above our houses, etc.?
That's a very important question. And to begin with, in experiments in laboratories, exposure of birds to electromagnetic signals, man-made signals, have changed their orientation capacity. But having said this, and since I'm very interested in birds, as is Christine Zips, I could say, no, I don't think it has anything to do like with 5G and so on. The video uptakes I've seen looks like a bird of prey striking to one of these swarms. And it's a very typical behavior. The swarm will try to go down, and in a very quick speed, they will hit anything. Some of the birds will actually be killed, but most of them are stunned for a few seconds or minutes, and then they will lift off again. They will walk around looking like drunks, more or less, you know, but they will take off, and the bird of prey will catch one, not the 1,000 of them, you know. So no, I don't think it has anything to do with that, but we need, of course, to keep our eyes open. And just recently I heard from veterinarians here in Sweden, and I come back to Cici's elegant presentation about sperm cell quality, that now the same you see in the human beings in Europe and United States, a dramatic decrease, you also see now in pet dogs. So it is spreading, and perhaps people are more interested in their pet dogs than in their cells. I don't know. So hopefully.
Okay, I'm thinking, Ole, what you were describing, that was an incident in Mexico, was it not? Was it a video that was shared?
Has been in the Netherlands, in Belgium, and so on. But there are single occasions, often filmed by CCTV cameras, and you see this classical bird of prey attacks. So that's what I have as a take on
Right.
it.
Okay. Somebody asked a question about should we be shielding our beehives for radio frequency? Would that help?
Oh, I love that question, because that's part of our hopefully future experiments, exactly doing that. Very, very smart. And to see if that would make a difference in any way, both introducing like a cell phone or a smart meter, and also shield the beehive away from external exposure. And today we don't know, but yeah, maybe it could be a good idea. I don't know.
Okay, wonderful. I also wanted to mention that over the last couple of days in preparing for this call, people have been reaching out, and I've been hearing more about people who attribute deaths, specifically deaths, to people who are exposed to these meters, as well as very intense experience of people who have become electrosensitive or electrohypersensitive, and then have to leave their homes to find another place to be, another place to live, and that we will have a until we stop this, we're going to have a growing problem with what are being called EMF refugees. And if you're ever on Facebook or any social media places, there are gathering places for some of these people to talk about their experiences. And it's heart-wrenching to know that this is going on.
Yeah. A very quick comment is that, like in Sweden, we are 10 million people, very few living in Sweden, you know, and of the 10 million, approximately 290,000 are electrohypersensitive. Most of them have a mild form of electrohypersensitivity. They don't need to leave their home, for instance. But of the 290,000, approximately 800 are refugees, and that's 800 too many. I agree.
That's right. And I know that somewhere in Europe that they have set up some quiet zones. Here in the United States, there's a few of them, also communities where people gather together to basically suffer together. Well, hopefully get relief from that suffering. And anybody who's ever experienced the experience of electrohypersensitivity, or AKA microwave sickness, knows that it is no walk in the park, because it did happen to me. It's much less than it was, thank God. Now
Could I
we're
just
talking
say-
about experiments, Ole.
Could
Yes.
I quickly say that I saw a very good comment on the chat about, I think it said golden finches, meaning birds in general. Of course, when the decline of insects is so dramatic as it is now, you will see an equally big decline in bird populations that feed on insects. And that we already see in Sweden. And when you remove some species from the ecosystem, others will thrive. So we have a lot of sea swarming birds that feed on fish. There are very many of them now. So those birds thrive, the others go extinct. Is that worth it just because you want to surf the internet while you walk around in the park? That's your choice.
Right. Well, so as regards experiments, so I mean, we have since this rollout is coming, first of all, to 500 addresses in the city, then followed by the rest of the city a number of months later, what sort of an experiment might we be able to do here that could conceivably assist in this process of educating ourselves and the public about a before and after of some sort? You're the scientist.
Yeah. To begin with, it would be such an honor to change address and live with you instead. Because no, really, I think we could do some wonderful experiments. And they are very cheap in the sense that, for instance, you should monitor the general health. And there are different systems to do that that are very simple. And we can talk more about that after this meeting. But you should monitor the health parameters before and after the introduction and after some time. And again, someone asked about shielding the beehives. Some years ago, what I wanted to do together with my collaborators was to sort of shield an entire small town in Sweden, meaning we should take away all the wireless communication, including television, radio, and so on. And we should watch the general healthy people if they would become more healthy over time, like 1 or 2 years. Unfortunately, we were turned down by the central authorities because, and I quote, they said, it's unethical to do such an experiment. We wanted to make them healthier, and that was unethical. So you see the problems we have here in Sweden, So yeah, I wish I could be with you instead.
Yeah, well, Colorado would love that, I'm sure. We are coming really close to our timeline. I just would like to, Pamela, are you there?
I am here. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. So is there anybody there who has any pressing questions that have to get answered now from Cece, from Susan, from Ole?
Actually, you've covered all of them as we've gone along. The one question, people were looking for the slides that Cece presented, and she so kindly has submitted that link already. So let's see. Yeah.
Could I just break in and say that if anyone wants to have our publications, they're of course free, and I could send them via Doe's email address, for instance. So that's very easily arranged. And we have published, for instance, about honeybees, but also about ants. It's a fantastic story. I will not dwell upon it now, but just a fantastic story. Ants don't like cell phones and cell phone radiation. And we have, of course, published a lot about any adverse health effects, electrohypersensitivity, and so on.
That is very wonderful, Ole. And we do have live links to all of our speakers on the website. And it's definitely my intention to get many more links so that people can get even further educated and watch your videos and help contribute to this cause and to your projects and research and support all of our speakers here today by learning more. I just wanted to kind of end this call with some thoughts, a few thoughts that I thought I'd be presenting in the beginning, but now really we've pretty much encapsulated the things we set out to do today. So I've got them written here. I'm dedicating this call to the highest good of everyone and all life on earth, first of all. And so we do that. One of the goals of this call is true informed consent for the residents of Longmont so that people can know whether or not opting out is correct for them. Hopefully many more people from this city than were able to get on the call today will eventually find their way to it and find this information and begin to consider whether they really want these meters in this city. Third, I would like to mention the Hippocratic Oath of first do no harm. And I would like to suggest, I just want to put this out there someplace where people can think about this, that all corporate and governmental bodies, and not just medical practitioners, adopt this oath as an oath of conscience. And last but not least, I'd like to ask, where is the precautionary principle as it pertains to the rolling out of smart meters in Longmont and advancing wireless technology in general? Now, with all of that being said, I believe that our city officials, including the Longmont Power Company, are acting in good faith in pursuing this rollout. I recognize that it appears like a done deal, but still, too many people don't know the finer details of the dark side of wireless devices and smart meters in particular. And some of our residents don't even know what a smart meter is. And so this is a huge educational effort on all of our parts. And the replay of this call will be available on our site, I assume, in the very near future. So anybody who wishes to share it, please, please have at it, share it with your friends, share it with the residents of Longmont, share it far and wide, wherever you like to share it. And thank you all so very much for both the speakers, the co-hosts, the Pamelas, the Christines in the background, and everybody else who contributed in some way to making this call happen today. You are all heroes in my book.
Thank you very much indeed, thank you so much.
Mhm.
And we will be in touch, Ole. And the rest, Cece also.
Thank you so much. This
And
has just been an
Susan.
incredible opportunity, and I'm hoping that the video will go out to many who need to see it. So thank you so much.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Thank you, Doe, and everyone. It's been fabulous.
Thank you for being in the background because of my technology issues, but we got it sorted out, and thank Amber for loaning me her computer.
Have your script here. You did a fabulous job.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. And Susan for showing up in spite of having a bug. Oh my God. She didn't even think she'd be able to speak today, but here she is.
Feel better, Susan.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure to be here. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Doe, for organizing this.
You bet. And there's more to come. We hope to do more, even singular interviews, and possibly maybe a forum on electrohypersensitivity with some EMF refugees and people who are suffering from this, so that people get a sense that this is a real thing.
That's a very good suggestion, and I loved listening to Susan. I'm very, very proud to also have been published paper with her previously, and she pointed to the importance of asking the simple questions. And the most common question I get where I sit here in Stockholm is this smart meter or cell phone safe for my child? And I just say always, I cannot say that. It is not. Because if it was, then, for instance, the insurance and reinsurance companies would have liability and responsibility over it, and they have refused. So
Exactly.
you are naked like a newborn, without the skin even. So, and that's more telling in a sense than any test tube or mouse or rat I could show, because the big players, they have all, without exception, bailed out from this safe area.
Mhm.
Yes, thank you. Ole, you were very patiently waiting on the call and the last to present, so you get to have the last word.
Well, I have my pillow here actually because it's 10 minutes past 10 in the evening.
Oh,
So,
it's
right?
almost bedtime, but you can go out and look at the northern lights, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All
And
right.
when you talk about the Northern Lights, it was a tremendous outburst. But then I was in West Africa, of course, but it was it was seen all over Sweden. Normally you see it in the northern part, but then you saw it in Stockholm and everywhere. So
I would like to add in a remark here from Susan Clark, who says we get farther by calling this EMS instead of EHS, the latter term having been concocted by the corrupt WHO in the late 1980s. And so she suggests that we use EMS, which is also recognized by the US Access Board. And I'm going to just hazard a guess that maybe that has something to do with being acknowledged as a disability as well.
What's the
Nancy would
H
know.
in EHS? What's EHS?
Electrohypersensitivity.
Oh, okay. I wasn't here at the beginning. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you all for coming. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
And be blessed.
See you on the other side.
thank you.